Welcome to Studio 411. I'm your host, Larry Dasilva, and we have an interesting show this day. We are going to be talking about the world of boxing, from bare-knuckle brawls to boxing battles, the very best that we certainly can remember. And there have been some great fighters and folks behind the scenes that have come out of the New York State area, and it's all featured in a new book by our friend Mark Allen Baker called Town U.S.A, Boxing in Upstate New York. Mark, welcome back.
Thank you, Larry. Delightful to be here.
Very good, very good. The book centers around a town, and I have to practice saying this, Canastota, or as Mark said, think of can of soda. Canastota, New York. And again, it apparently over the years, unbeknownst to me, has been the epicenter of upstate New York's rich boxing heritage. And of course, another thing I learned, which I encourage all, I know I'm going to want to check it out, it's the home of a facility that was opened about 20-some years ago, the International Boxing Hall of Fame.
That's absolutely correct. And Canastota is only about 25 miles from downtown Syracuse. So those of you who actually saw fights in the old days at the Syracuse War Memorial will realize it's just down the road and worth a visit. About 25 miles. It's a little hamlet. It's one of those towns that was built really through the advent of the Erie Canal. And it happened to be at that section where Canastota is, was actually the lowest, the flattest section, and the first section that they worked on. So yeah, Canastota, the town kind of formed around the whole creation of the Erie Canal, and there's just a canal museum right there in town, and it's just a fascinating story in addition to the wonderful boxing heritage that it has.
Now, again, as we've discussed with other books of yours that we've had you on about, how did this book, the idea, or how did the whole thing kind of formulate with you getting involved?
This was something that is one of those books that I wanted to do. This was something that I felt was so strong and such a big belief. I was a part of it from the very beginning, and I felt that if anybody was going to do this story, it had to be me. Only because I knew all the players and I knew how the whole museum began and how the pieces fit and why Canastota. So I said, you know, at that time when the idea first was formulated, and I had talked about it for years, I had done a number of boxing books. I was talking to the director of the museum, Ed Brophy, and I said, Ed, wouldn't it be great? I mean, think about this. We have hundreds of thousands of visitors from all over the world come to upstate New York. And ironically, they ask the same questions. And I could always get them the answers to those questions. But when they wanted additional information, I had to point them to like 12, 15 different sources, some of them out of print, some really thick, like ring record books. Sure. And I told Ed, I said, what if we just hand them that one copy that answered everything? And I went to the History Press with the idea, not really sure if they would take it, but they bid on it, and 3 printings later, we're just delighted that they did.
Speaking of the Boxing Hall of Fame, here's an image of it right here.
Yeah, that was an image that I took in the early years. Now it's a little bit different. Now where the right side is now, you'll see a pavilion, and we've got a picture of that. But that's right there, right off the New York State Thruway. You can actually, when you're passing by, you'll see flags in the pavilion area that was added. Perfect placement for it. It's close to some of the other attractions in town and a lot of historical sites in town. So it worked well.
You mentioned Edward Brophy, the executive director of the Hall of Fame, and read a quote from Mr. Brophy. The Hall of Fame is a way for Canastota to pay tribute to its 2 world champions, welterweight and middleweight champion Carmen Basilio and welterweight champion Billy Backus, who I found out as I read the book, and we'll talk about them a little later, is a nephew of Basilio.
Exactly right. Billy is the son of Nellie, Carmen's sister. The Basilio family was a large family, and it's just hard to imagine that a hamlet this size. I mean, we're looking at roughly, what, 5,000, between 4,000 and 6,000 people. And to think to have 1 world champion is one thing. To think to have 2 is almost impossible, and to think that they were related, even more so.
Sure.
Yeah, so it was really something.
To continue with Mr. Brophy's quote, in addition, a way to say thank you to the great sport that is woven into the fabric of the village. Canastota is, quote, boxing's hometown, unquote, for fistic legends and fans who love the sport.
It sure is, and I'm delighted because it seems like the perfect place. And so often, so many people have said, well, Cooperstown is just perfect for baseball. It's quaint, and it's scenic, it's historic. The same feel that you get in Cooperstown is the same feel you're going to have it when you get to Canastota and get a chance to really look around the town, visit inside the Hall of Fame and outside, and some of the multiple buildings now. And there's plans for expansion, and it just grows by leaps and bounds every year.
And the Hall of Fame opened in 1989. And I'll be honest with you, as big a sports fan as I am, I was totally unaware that it was even there. So again, just a great place, I'm sure. And as you said, a lot of expansion.
Oh yeah, and it was let me tell you an interesting story, Larry. At that time, I was building a sports bar in Central New York, 8,000 square foot sports bar that even included a boxing ring inside. And I wanted the ultimate sports bar, so I figured I just can't put posters up. So we built a museum inside. So we had our own museum, our own indoor boxing ring, and there's Mr. Brophy right there. And I'll never forget, I was working one evening, which I seldom did at that point because I had another job full time, and somebody said, Ed Brophy's having dinner, and he wants to talk to you. And I'm like, Ed Brophy. And the gentleman is the director of the Boxing Hall of Fame. So I went over, sat next to Ed, and we started chatting. He said, and he explained the whole idea, and I was a little leery, because I had heard that, well, there's a Hall of Fame in New York, there's a Hall of Fame in Las Vegas. I mean, how is this all going to fit? I met Ed. Ed said, boy, I can't believe what you've got going here in this sports bar with all the artifacts. He said, would you help me? And that's how it started. And I have held almost every position, volunteer position they've had since then, as so many other people have. And it's really been an honor, and there could be no more perfect director than Ed Brophy, in my opinion.
Why such a rich pool of talent has come, and we'll touch on some of the names throughout the hour that have come from New York State?
Yeah, it's funny, and part of when we thought about it, and one of the common questions when people walk in the front door is, well, what do you mean New York? They think of downstate, of course, and you would have to with Madison Square Garden and the great fighters, the great New York fighters that you can't touch. And often, I'm thinking to myself, well, if the Boxing Hall of Fame wasn't in Canastota, then where would it be? That was one of the questions that came up. The obvious would be New York or Buffalo. Some great talent. Some of the best light heavyweights you can imagine came out of Buffalo. Just right down the road, going the other direction, not towards Syracuse, but west out of Canastota, is a gentleman from Herkimer, New York, Lou Ambers. They used to call the Herkimer Hurricane. And Lou's a person that came up from there. The two gentlemen on the right on my boxing book, the far right is Tommy Ryan, a gentleman from Syracuse. The other gentleman next to him was Jack Britton. And both of those were upstate New York. They were born there. They lived in various parts of upstate New York. They had gyms there. It just seemed like once I started doing the research, all these people came out of the woodwork, and it was in recent years, of course, Mike Tyson out of Catskill, Custom Models whole group.
We're here with Mark Allen Baker joining us. The book titled Town U.S.A. Boxing in Upstate New York. Again, from people like Floyd Patterson to Mike Tyson, as we just mentioned, heavyweights, so many others. Welterweights, as we discussed earlier, Carmen Basilio, Billy Backus, and so many more. So a lot to get to today. Again, let me just flip here to a section here on page 16. We were talking about some of the contributors. Again, and it goes beyond just the boxing. You mentioned, cutmen. I don't know about managers as much, but again, trainers. And then you've got people here like Jen Grossinger, of course, anyone who goes back.
And I put Jenny Grossinger in there, and a lot of people forget about it. When I was a kid, and I lived at that time in the southern tier of New York, I mean, Grossinger's was the spot. I remember Dick Tiger training up in Grossinger's, and I mean, it was a plethora of boxers constantly hanging around Grossinger's. And I would just beg my father or my best friend's father down the road, let's go to Grossinger's. I think Dick Tiger's training there. I think, and like I said, the list was endless of the fighters that were training there.
And now Grossinger's, again, with things kind of evolving, some for the better, some for not, is no longer is closed.
Yeah, and I was fortunate to go there near the end, and it just lost a lot. Unfortunately, lost a lot of its appeal, and it's really something that's it's hurt when you drive down Route 17. You see it up on the hill, and I have so many wonderful memories of being there for so many conferences, and then to see it, it's like, gosh, it almost deserves a monument in my opinion.
I mean, the Catskills in general.
I mean,
Catskills
really,
not only from
one
entertainment and I mean, there was a lot of resorts and different things, as well as the
Olympic
boxing.
training.
As for many reasons. Again, obviously. The Grossinger family, again, if they passed on, I'm sure then, things happen. It used to be a place when I grew up called beautiful Mount Airy Lodge, which is in Pennsylvania.
I remember
and
Mount
used to
Airy
see the
Lodge.
commercials for, all these big acts that would play there, whatever. And then, of course, times change, tastes change. And next thing you know, all of a sudden one day I'm reading and they're auctioning off, everything they could. Now it's being built up again, as a casino, and so maybe Grossinger's or something
it'll come back.
will come back. But again, it's hard because boxing, which I'll ask you as we go on, the boxing that I kind of knew as a kid and a young man growing up has changed an awful lot. Not just the names, it's just the way it's handled. The not leagues, but you know what I'm saying. We were talking about it earlier. The classifications there's like it seemed like 4 titles for one class of weight, and I'm thinking this let's like college football. Let's just everybody get together and just have one champ, one for each class. Let's not have 2 heavyweight, 3 heavyweight. Speaking of which, we were talking boxing again in some way, shape, or form originated, I'm sure, going back to the Romans or Lord knows farther back than that. But it seemed like the more recent history, and I'm talking about from again, like the 1800s, seemed to have been something that came mainly out of Britain. Now,
absolutely.
And why was that they took the lead?
The rules, first off, the rules, and all your great bare knuckle champions came from there, and obviously they migrated when, during the birth of this nation. We were talking earlier about how, during the Revolutionary War, that each of the British camps had their own fighters, and they would wage fights back and forth, obviously to pass the time. I'm sure it was done in the American camps as well. I can't quote it the way I can quote some of the British. But General Percy, for example, had Bill the Terror Richmond, a great fighter, great bare knuckle fighter, who some believe was actually the executioner of Nathan Hale. Some believe that he was part of that.
Another show. You'll have to watch.
Yeah. So, but yes, I mean, boxing gained popularity, and obviously with the advent of the country and the growth in the sport, and eventually growing from bare knuckles, and John L. Sullivan to glove fighters.
I mean, a lot of people don't even realize that. Again, that bare knuckle fighting.
Oh.
Just amazing. I mean.
Yeah, and the other thing too, and here's another, again, it's consequence, but during the Erie Canal days, I mean, there was a lot of fighting on the Erie Canal. And Patty Ryan, I have on the front of the book a little graphic. That's actually Patty Ryan, a lithograph that I found. And Patty Ryan fought at Canastota, and the barges would pull up, and of course the canal would freeze, so they would spend the winter wherever their boat froze in the canal. And of course, there's a lot of saloons along the way, and fights always happen. They'd happen on the barge, and Patty Ryan made quite a name for him. A gentleman named John Morrissey made quite a name for himself as well in upstate New York during that time period. And you were talking the days where there were shorter rounds, but you might go 150 rounds, you might go 184 rounds.
Well, speaking of rounds, is that again when we grew up there were 15-round fights. I mean, I don't recall anything really beyond that. I mean, going back to the old days, they basically, I'm talking before we were born, till basically, the last man standing. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there were some fights that I hear back to Jack Johnson era where they were, fighting for, I don't even know. I thought I heard of one that was like 60-some rounds.
Sure. Oh, sure. It was incredible. It's incredible. And you think of, I mean, gosh, how hot it was, and, the gloves were so heavy, and you don't have the air-conditioned buildings that you used to have.
Air conditioning was a breeze, or it might be the breeze of that left hook.
I mean, there's horror stories even about modern-day fighters, like the Joey Maxim Ray Robinson fight that I think Joey beat Ray. I'm pretty sure it was like 104 degrees ringside, and even the modern days, there's just some stories of just horrific conditions that these fighters
and
fought
even
in.
the indoor fights, that would have been with, again, not like now where cigarette smoking is prohibitive. I mean, it was like cigars, cigarettes. So, I mean, these gentlemen were battling not only fatigue, battling their opponent, but also, I mean, the air. You couldn't cut through it. I mean,
it was so thick. I mean, I hear stories of the old days of the Garden. It was just incredible. Like clouds actually formed in certain parts of the Garden. Like they could tell the round by how much cloud cover was in various parts of the Garden. And there's so many just wonderful, wonderful stories. And I'm convinced, I guess, being a historian, that you really have to understand boxing to be a good historian, because the sport really parallels a lot of social changes in our country, and if you follow it, and I still believe some of the best historians do follow it, you can learn so much about our history just by following the sport. And that's another reason that I wanted to write the book, is to appeal to the younger crowd and show them that it's a history-driven sport, it's a great sport, and it's a rich sport. And I always kid around with the people during book signings. I said I wrote the only boxing book where there's 50 pictures, not a single picture of somebody actually getting hit.
Right. Oh. Okay.
So because I wanted kids to pick it up. I think there's one curse word, so you have to excuse me. But I did interview Carmen Basilio, and he does have some tough opinions on certain people.
So did Willie Pep and many others from that era.
And I got a nice picture of Willie, and I've got great stories about Willie. And I know they recently did a movie about him, and I was in contact during the production of that movie with the writer of the film. So.
Title Town USA, Boxing in Upstate New York. Mark Allen Baker joining us for the hour here on Studio 411. You mentioned earlier the Garden, and there's a section here in the book about Madison Square Garden, which again had a rich history. I don't think as much anymore, but a rich history dating back to the 20s through they mentioned the final fight, I guess, before the renovations and different things happened. But again, Bernard Hopkins defeating Felix Trinidad, Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali. Again, what surprised me, the Joe Frazier, Muhammad Ali, the 71 fight of the century. With Ali, 77 last MSG bout. Now again, to me, I'm thinking he fought for at least 3 more, maybe 4 more years. And so you start to see the Vegas influence, as well as sometimes fights being held, not just the Thrilla in Manila, but fights being held elsewhere, maybe to up the ante or up the purse or the money that was to be made.
Absolutely right.
Sugar Ray Robinson, 1962, which we'll talk a little bit more about him later, because there's a statistic that will boggle most people in terms of the number of fights that some of these people fought.
Yes, and, especially Mr. Pep from here in Connecticut.
Yeah,
Willie, I think fought 240, I think, somewhere in that range.
Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano. Now that was the fight where Marciano, I think, was it a TKO or was it might have been a knockout, but I saw the fight on film. And that was basically Lewis's last hurrah. And
Marciano didn't want to hurt him. And that happens a lot. I mean, I think back to the Larry Holmes and Muhammad Ali fight, and obviously Larry was in his prime, and here's his hero. Here's the guy he sparred with, and he's got to sit there and enter the ring with him. It had to be tragic to have to hurt. He didn't want to hurt him, and of course Larry Holmes is best left jab in boxing history, in my opinion, but.
Marciano, what amazed me about this was October 26 of 1951. Now, Marciano, for those who don't know, was what I call a clean 49-0. 49, never lost a fight. Got out when the getting was good, But what amazes me, he fought for another 5 years, and yet never fought in Madison Square Garden, which I don't know that you have the answer. I just find that amazing. To be such a mecca of boxing, and yet. Speaking of boxing,
you threw this is the jab you threw at me.
This was your little quiz today. I found this image. This is from 1924. This is the U.S. boxing team, I believe, in France for the 1924 Olympics. I don't know how they finished, but certainly a scrappy group of gentlemen.
A lot of great fighters came out of the Olympics. I mean, I was talking to a gentleman here. that actually would be, in recent years, have become a good feed system for professional boxing. A lot of these fighters coming out of the Olympics starting to get a little bit of a following. Of course, during my era, it was Ray Leonard. It was Ali, but it was Ray Leonard, of course, and the Spinks brothers, and it was, you caught on, you followed the fighter, and the patriotism almost became patriotic, and it was such a huge draw going from the Olympics to professional boxing, and we've missed some of that, I think.
Well, reading some sections where you kind of cover the decades as they went on, and of course this applies to any situation, especially in sports, as your cable systems and even prior to that, all of a sudden you had to go to the fights back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Okay, then in the 70s you had the advent of not pay-per-view. What was it? Where you had to go to an arena, like for instance, I went.
Yeah,
to
I didn't
see
remember closed circuit.
Closed circuit, yes. I went to see
while.
like an Alexis Arguello fight. I want to say 80 something, or maybe I think it was the mid 80s, and the place was going crazy, and he was fighting in South America somewhere. I mean, and it was an experience. Once again, the cloud of smoke. You walked out like, wow, this is. I think I've been in one of those smoking lounges for too long.
Yeah, you felt like you were there.
Was it Aaron? It might have been Aaron Pryor.
Well, it'd be great if it was Aaron. I mean, those two.
Because Arguello lost the fight.
Arguello never did beat him. Yeah. But it was a I mean, the battle. I mean, it's one of the classic battles. Aaron the Hawk, Aaron and Alexis.
And Arguello, again, one of the tremendous Argentinian.
Yeah. Nicaraguan, I think.
Nicaragua, yeah, and just passed away within the last couple of years, unfortunately.
And Alexis was a great advocate of the Hall. Yeah. He came up constantly, as Willie Pep, of course. I've got so many stories about Willie coming up, and my favorite story is one where I'm sitting home. Willie Pep was my grandfather's favorite boxer. Okay, so when I was a kid, and I had no idea Willie Pep was, my grandfather would tell me stories of Willie Pep. And my grandfather passed in '66, so I'm getting a call. I live down the road. Ed says and Willie used to come up constantly, often unannounced. So he would just show up at the hall. Can you imagine being you're in a little town, and then Willie Pep shows up at the front door, and he would amaze fans. He would tell them all the great stories of him and Sandy Sadler boxing. And so Ed gives me a call one day. He says, I got Willie's coming up, and I have no host for him. Would you host him the whole day? So I had him the whole day.
Nice.
And it was like a dream come true for me. And so I'm taking him across the street is McDonald's. So I'm taking over to the McDonald's for lunch. And he's showing me, and those of you from Hartford know that Willie has the same stories. He's showing me the watch that he got, I think it was from Rocky Graziano. And so he's telling me the same stories, and we're going through this. And it was a dream come true for me. Because here I am with my grandfather's favorite boxer, and I'm spending the whole day with him and
you're
interviewing
buying Willie a happy meal.
Happy meal, and people are coming up to us and like, "Aren't you Willie Pep?" Well, of course. Now Willie Pep has a vanity plate on his card that says Willie Pep. It says Pep,
I think I saw that one.
And Ed Brophy's, and I think I've even got a picture in the book. And Ed Brophy's got a Willie Pep license plate as well.
Here's an example of an item I found: advertisements, probably for cigarettes back in the day.
The old days.
And here's a still of another one of the great boxers of the 20th century, later a restaurateur. Mr. Jack Dempsey, who lost a controversial fight back in 1927.
So many controversial
fights. The Gene
fights.
Tunney fight, was that the one?
The long count.
Yeah,
the long count, and that was unbelievable. And Tunney, of course, from the great state of Connecticut. Yeah. And when I was a kid, I mean, when we were kids, I'll say me because I'll take responsibility for maybe being a tad older. So I used to write to the fighters. And I used to write to Gene Tunney, and he used to write to Jack Dempsey, and I was always shocked when, Tunney would write me back, and I'd ask him about the fights. And it was just a different era. But, I mean, it was so nice. These people were so accessible. And we kind of lost, and you were talking about how boxing has lost some of its popularity. Well, we've had the advent of the other sports, football and baseball. And, baseball was there a little bit longer, but we've got, football and hockey and some of those other sports.
Yeah, at one point in this country, again, prior to, I think, both of us, boxing, I mean, there were times where folks would say that boxing was even more popular than baseball. And remember, baseball in those days, 154 games, not 162. But I mean, you had boxing matches that when they happened, they were like it was like the World Cup, but only in one night. But
Joe Louis. Yeah, just think of Joe Louis. I mean, there's so many stories of, Harlem came to a stop. New York City came to a stop when Joe Louis fought. And then, of course, the classic battles that really changed history, the Louis Schmeling battles. The whole advent of World War II and the exchange of the belts. And, we were talking earlier about Adolf Hitler sending the Hindenburg over to pick up Max Schmeling. After he defeated Louis in the first fight.
I'm going to hold this up if camera number 3 can pick this up. Mark was kind enough to give this to me when he gave me a signed copy of the book. This is from a marvelous boxer, and again, someone who was a terrific person. So I understand you got to meet him.
I talked to him. I would
Max
do a
Schmeling.
lot of correspondence with Max over the years.
Former heavyweight champ of the world.
And, sign things and talk about things, and I'd have to. Fortunately, at that time, I was working at work where I was working at General Electric. I had a gentleman who spoke fluent German, and Max would write in German, so he would always translate my letters for me.
And this was, of course, at that time, 1937. I'm sure the training probably started in 36. They fought 2 bouts. Schmeling beat a young Joe Louis. Of course, Hitler's doing the dance of joy because superiority. Imagine? I'm sure he was probably happy after being humiliated by Jesse Owens in the German Olympics.
What a contrast!
Just look at now track and field and boxing. I mean, we weren't talking just like today. There's certain sports that again, basketball has got a bigger foothold. Baseball, thinks that it's the best thing, and I love baseball. But again, it's in some of those European countries, it's soccer, boxing, and of course, then when you have the Olympics or World Cup, I mean, it's like just the world stops, for these things.
And we often forget too. In the old days, I mean, you were taught boxing in school. I mean, it wasn't until I don't know, probably up to the 60s, I can remember some schools still teaching boxing for self-defense. And it wasn't, and I always go back to this. I always have conversations with people about this, saying there wasn't bullying back then.
Right.
There wasn't bullying back then because everybody could defend themselves. And I'm thinking of that. Now, I'm not advocating that we go back to necessarily training boxing, because I'm also an advocate of things like headgear for fighters, because I think it's taken a terrible toll on many of them. I'm also an advocate of.
There was earlier still on here again of a we'll call it primitive headgear, and again, looking at it, and it'll come up a little later, the same shot that I put on this montage. All of a sudden, it's no different than some of the early football headgear. It really did nothing. It was just, and then we wonder why folks, and again, people such as Floyd Patterson, who again, years ago producing a sports talk show, got a chance to book them to appear via phone, Ingemar Johansson, Floyd Patterson on the same sports show.
I don't know how you did that.
Well, it was we had what we call in those days a split line, literally almost like a party line. To talk to the two hosts,
can't imagine this.
And that was pretty. And of course, those two remained close. But my point was that Patterson, dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever, all brought on by these hits. Muhammad Ali, there's some question he may be sharp of mind, but look at the debilitating condition he's been in.
I know it's just
so many.
tragic.
I mean, it's just that. With that, I think people were like, oh, well, it was caused by boxing. Whereas, all the other sports, headbutting with a soccer ball never happened.
It's amazing, too. You're right. They just never seemed, the connotation just never seemed to be there. It never seemed, until recently with football, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, geez, it makes sense. Well, naturally, boxing's been facing this for a long period of time.
And only now, again, I'm sure there's others that I'm just blanking on that. Many have passed on now, but again, that clearly have Alzheimer's, dementia type symptoms, and Patterson was the one that very lovely man. Never met him in person, but talked to him when we contacted him about doing that show at that time, and was just a very soft-spoken man. And just very nice man.
I think he eventually ended up New York State boxing commissioner. If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he did. Yeah, and I think
that's when I think I met him. We came up to the hall.
Yeah.
And he had Tracy Patterson was fighting too.
It was a stepson.
Was fighting for a while.
Didn't really have much success, and certainly not on the level of his stepfather.
Floyd was a real draw, another great advocate of the hall, and just been so many friends over the years that have really contributed to this really unique place. And I can't encourage people enough. I mean, I'm not just pushing. The book is really about community. It's a community tied together by these two individuals, these two great fighters, these two, welterweight champions of the world. And they all have this sense. I mean, they're just wonderful people. And now I don't even go there for the fighters. I go there for the volunteers.
Right here, Carmen Basilio, welterweight champ, correct, that we spoke of earlier, and that leads me right into my next quote here. My boyhood dream was to win a championship in Yankee Stadium. Again, why were so many boxing matches, not just in New York, but again, primarily East Coast, but why were so many boxing matches held at outdoor events such as Yankee Stadium in those first 60 years of that 20th century?
Yeah, they had the old Polo Grounds. They had a bunch of places that held huge outdoor venues, and some of them that they built specifically for specific fights. And they could get it. I mean, it was the advent of the super promoter, the advent of people like Tex Rickard, who really knew how to put a fight on. And when you had the big fighters and the big draws like he had with Dempsey, you could fill it. And that's really the advent of the money, the great promotions, the great fighters, the popularity of the media, all contributed to the change.
I mean, think about it. I mean, the lighting, even in later years, must have been tremendous. I mean, obviously the Yankee Stadium, the old Yankee Stadium we're talking about. But again, the ring, and I don't know the dimensions, you probably do. What are the dimensions of a ring?
Gosh, I mean, it slips my memory too. So somehow, I don't know. I mean, there's different dimensions, and it slips my mind
12
now.
by 12 by 12, whatever, however they figure it.
I think it might have been
but I'm saying
big.
In the middle of Yankee Stadium, probably out by like second base, and all of a sudden you have the old Yankee Stadium in excess for some of these fights. Certainly the Louis Marciano one comes to mind. Probably 65 to 70,000 people watching, what looks like probably a blip.
I can't imagine how small that is now.
Yeah.
We're so spoiled now with these concerts, with these huge projection devices.
There's Graziano's Italian
restaurant.
And
this is a great story too. And Tony Graziano, who owns the restaurant, is literally a stone's throw from the Boxing Hall of Fame. Tony ends up being a manager. Manages Billy Backus. And Tony's a great story. He's a paratrooper during the Normandy invasion. He's telling me, I would sit down with him at the restaurant, he would tell me stories. I used to run fighters into Cuba, and fascinating individual, still alive. I think he's like 93 or so.
Wow.
And if you get a chance, stop in. Graziano's is like the Toots Shores of upstate New York now. People don't remember how big Toots Shores was in New York, where all the great athletes hung out. Mm-hmm. And Graziano's is literally the old-style Italian restaurant. And Tony's got pictures of all the relatives on the wall. Great food, and there's tons and tons of boxing pictures of just everybody.
So that restaurant is still going.
Still going. We're stone's throw. You have to go. It is the most unadvertised but most popular place to be during the boxing induction weekend, because all the fighters end up, dropping by.
Mark Allen Baker joining us for the hour. Town U.S.A. Boxing in upstate New York here on Studio 411. Just running through a few of the names again that I either knew or that the book enlightened me on. Of course, every time I'm on 84 heading to or from, let's say, Pennsylvania, New Paltz, I always think of Floyd Patterson.
Yeah.
While maybe not born there, but necessarily spent a great deal of his adult life there. Mike Tyson, again, from up in the Catskills area. Joe Louis, where was Joe? I heard something about Detroit, but then spent a lot of time in Buffalo, I believe.
He spent, then he went into, there was a whole casino shift and all that stuff. But mostly a Midwestern. I don't know how much time he spent. I know he did box out that way. So. And
of course, Basilio and Backus. So again, just
there's a lot of smaller fighters. That people remember. Jack Sharkey from Binghamton, being a great heavyweight. Again, all the great light heavyweights out of Buffalo. It just seems like Syracuse again with Jack Britton and Tommy Ryan and just they had fighters that a lot of people might not know, people like Nick Barone, the DeJohn boys. The DeJohns are just a fabulous boxing family, and I actually dedicated my book to some of the great upstate New York boxing families.
There's Willie Pep.
There's Willie
in later years, yeah.
And like I said, and here's the accessibility. When you come up to Canastota, unlike now with the Baseball Hall of Fame where you're so restricted, even with a press pass, of actually meeting somebody like an Al Kaline or somebody that happens to be there, or George Brett. Here's Willie Pep, and he's just at a chair, and you can sit down and have a cup of coffee with him. Or you might catch Willie walking over to Graziano's, or you could sit down with him. And all these fighters are accessible. They're there, I mean, granted, it now draws a lot of autograph collectors because all these guys willingly, not charging, freely sign things. So you get a lot of people with gloves, but they're all there, and you can get a chance. I mean, they're up close, they're personal, and that's been one of the beauties of Canastota, is that these people are so accessible. And in addition to that, and it's an entire weekend, beginning on Thursday, running till Sunday. There's also little like fireside chats where some of these might get Bert Sugar sitting down and talking about the advent of the heavyweights, or you'll get some of the great talent, the great promoters talking, Bob Arum talking about the challenges he faced over time, or some of the trainers like a Gil Clancy talking about developing an Emil Griffith, and all this stuff is happening just in these little pockets, or doing these little like coffee house sessions right on the grounds. It's incredible. I mean, where are you going to get this? I mean, and over the years, and I mean, I'm thinking back, and I'm seeing Billy Kahn, Jersey Joe Wolcott. These people are just walking around, sitting talking. The great Pittsburgh fighter Billy Kahn. Oh my word, can't imagine.
You mentioned a few moments ago Syracuse, and again to throw some folks that again had their own influence as well as the love of the sport of boxing. Syracuse native Rod Serling, of course, who many of you think, well, what do I know? Is he a boxer? Well, no. He, of course, was the playwright, author, writer of The Twilight Zone, and, of course, his homage to boxing, Requiem, say that 3 times fast,
Requiem
for a heavyweight,
a
movie. Let me see if I have it right. I know there was a television play back in the 50s, but the movie was Anthony Quinn played the washed-up boxer. Jackie Gleason was the manager or cut man, whatever. And again, just a great movie. I think there was even some
there were some
boxers,
cameos.
wasn't
I think Maxie Rosenblum
was in there.
I think Willie was in there. I think Willie squeezed in there. There's so many. We were talking earlier about some of the stars that happened to show up during the filming of Cinderella Man. Here's Angelo and Russell Crowe. And here's Russell Crowe just with his North Bergen sweatshirt on, walking around. Now who would expect to see Russell Crowe there? And I can remember
Angelo Dundee.
Angelo Dundee on the left,
affiliated with Muhammad Ali and many other boxers.
And Carmen Basilio. Carmen Basilio for a while too.
But Rod Serling, lived to only 50. I mean, it was a man that was intense in everything he did. But they said.
See, I tried to draw some of that into the book. I was trying to include people like writers and trainers and referees and even ring announcers. I put a couple of ring announcers in there that really became voices for their specific areas. Some from Rochester, some from Syracuse. Promoters, good and bad.
There was a boxer that you listed, Rory Calhoun. Was that the later actor, or
no,
is that just a
different
different person? I'm looking at that and I'm saying, wow. I said, because obviously
I think one of them, the actor probably patterned himself or somehow.
Because many boxers went on to. I mean, Mike Tyson is one that I wouldn't call him an actor, but he kind of makes a little bit of a living doing that kind of stuff. Yeah. Sugar Ray Robinson would show up occasionally. I remember him showing up
Robinson
on Batman.
Yeah.
He played one of the Penguins guys on Batman. I mean, this is like I'm thinking he must have a bill to pay, because I'm like.
Well, he stopped for a while, and people forget that he saw himself as an entertainer, a singer, an actor.
Tell us about that.
This was a great shot. This is a picture of Jack Dempsey taking a shot at Harry Houdini with Benny Leonard holding Harry back, and that's the closest I come to a contact shot in the book. Is right there. But I like the shot. Jack Dempsey. Like I said, I was fortunate enough over the years to have some contact with Dempsey. I think the world of Jack Dempsey. He's a great story, going all the way back to his Kid Blackie days out in the West and fighting under these different names and going to bars and challenging. It was like the old West, and Dempsey was such an anchor and a part of that history.
He was, and again, a restaurateur for many, many years. Dempsey's.
Yeah, you see,
right up there with like Toots Shores in New York City. Just a tremendous.
I always see that classic shot in The Godfather where they remade Jack Dempsey's place, and I'm like, oh boy, what I would have given to.
Now we were talking about Sugar Ray Robinson again, who I saw. I saw some fights on film, and I might have seen one towards the very end. But welterweight and middleweight, at least those two I know of, might have been other heavyweight. welterweight and middleweight champion of the world on more than one occasion. 1952 retired, and then due to a lot of debts and was not a great businessman, a lot of tax issues, came back. But in 1952 when he retired, now think of this is mind-boggling to me, was 131, 2 losses and 2 draws.
I know.
And I'm thinking today's boxers, you wouldn't get to half that amount of fights, 131, and you mentioned people like Willie Pep that were in the 200
Yeah,
range.
I think it was 240 for Willie.
I mean, that's like fighting 5 times, 6 times a year.
I know, and we don't understand that frequency nowadays. And the other thing I mentioned in the book is when people used to come into obviously to Canastota because of Carmen Basilio, they're always like, how does Carmen fit into Ray Robinson? They don't realize that by the time Carmen starts fighting, Ray Robinson almost has 100 fights. Yeah. You know, and it's just the parallels are just, and I try to bring that. I really wanted to show the difference in the two and really take you into that, you know, that fight at Yankee Stadium and how much that meant and what that meant to the people of the town. And
there's
Ken Norton.
Late Ken Norton.
Happens to be in a bar, my bar at the time, inside the ring, inside the sports bar that I own, and that actually is my son with him. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I wasn't aware of that.
Into that bar.
You talked about folks like Ken Norton. I would say that fight of his that I saw, I want to say was in San Diego in 1973 against Muhammad Ali, and apparently he broke Ali's jaw in the first round. Got a decision, if I recall. And again, that was, for me as a kid growing up, at that point I was a teenager, almost college. I'm thinking, boy, that is like, you know, amazing.
Have you ever seen Ken in person? I mean,
say again?
Did you ever have a chance to meet Ken when he was alive in person?
No, I didn't.
I would meet him a lot, and he was even inside my bar. Obviously, that's a picture of it there. And Ken was chiseled. I mean, he was probably the best form of any fighter I've ever seen. He was just an incredible figure in person.
He did, if you recall, unless I'm totally off on this, did a little acting. You recall the movie that he did? He was in, wasn't he Mandingo? And
yes, that's right. That's right. You're absolutely right. That's right.
I mean, he was like Apollo Creed, but perfect. He was the real deal. He was Carl Weathers. You know, actually, if he was a little younger, I'm surprised they didn't get him to play Apollo Creed because they almost look, you know, with the mustache and just the chiseled physique. You know.
Oh, Ken was incredible. I mean, Ken was just so strong. His fists, and they had the other good, interesting element of the Boxing Hall of Fame is you go to these different museums. When you go to the Boxing Hall of Fame, they do fist casts as part of the induction.
Very nice.
The inductees get their fist cast in plaster and then covered in like bronze or gold or some kind of paint. And they actually have them sitting out in a glass case. And they had a collection. This dates all the way back to, I believe, when the Hall of Fame was still in New York City. I think Nat Fleischer had it. And Nat had some of these done, and they continued that whole custom of having that done. So you can go there and see Primo Carnera's hand, you know, that enormous fist that Carnera
Primo
had.
Carnera was like 6'7".
Oh, monster.
And there was another
Tony
one.
Galento. Remember Two-Ton Tony Galento?
The father of, you guys might know him as, the son was Jethro in the Beverly Hillbillies. Max Baer Jr., Max Baer Sr. around the time of Primo Carnera in the 30s and maybe early 40s. Another large man. I mean, again, these
Max was a big boy.
Max Schmeling was also very tall.
Yeah.
I mean, these were not the little guys like Joe Frazier and even Rocky Marciano.
Yeah.
They were all like 6'4", 6'5".
And there was a wonderful portrayal of Max in Cinderella Man, and that really showed, and it was a great, I mean, that was well done. I mean, Ron Howard did a terrific job, and hats off to Russell Crowe, too, for what he did. But it was the parallels between Braddock and Baer, I mean, they were like right there. They were like perfect, and Max was every bit the kind of Max that you saw in the movie.
I have not seen that. I have it on my list of movies to
Great
see.
Movie. Great movie.
And I did not realize the earlier shot we saw. I thought it looked familiar, and I thought it was you, but, you know, early on I said, well, why does that face look familiar? Of course, it was Russell Crowe.
Yeah, it was Russell Crowe, yeah.
A little thinner than we see him now.
But there's so many good stories, and that's part of why I loved being a volunteer there. There's a great story. Is one there one morning, I think it was like a Saturday morning, and a gentleman comes up to the door. I'm the only one there, and we were set up because I was doing some volunteer work in the auction area. Gentleman's at the door with a motorcycle helmet on, and he's knocking. He said, "I'm here for Ed." I said, "Can I help you? Can I help you?" "Here for Ed Brophy." And I said, "Okay, may I ask who's calling?" He takes his helmet off. He says, "Yeah, tell him Daniel Day-Lewis is here."
No kidding.
And,
who lives here in Connecticut.
Yeah, so
and actually
Mr.
rides around his motorcycle
Yeah,
quite
Mr.
often.
Lewis rode his motorcycle up to Canastota because at that time, one of the fighters who trained him in the boxer, Barry McGeegan, was being inducted. Barry had helped him with the boxer, as did, I'm pretty sure the museum helped him as well. But yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis sat down, talked to all of us. He was just such a gentleman. I
had forgotten about that movie.
He was just a tremendous, tremendous person, and so many, and the stories are endless. And another one of my favorites, and I'll try to tell it as quick as I can, so I'm taking up your time, is a story about Jack Kearns' son, who's walking around looking for all these strange pieces of memorabilia. Everybody sends them to me because of my background. And I said, "Can I ask who you are?" He says, "Yeah, I'm Jack Kearns." He said, "I got a question for you. I got a big trunk in my basement." I said, name a famous referee with the initials W.E. And I'm like, so I'm thinking back, what is he talking about? He says, famous referee left his trunk in my basement. It was Wyatt Earp.
Oh, Wyatt Earp.
Wyatt Earp was friends with Jack Kearns' dad.
Wow.
Wyatt Earp was a referee. So tremendous story too. I'm like, oh my God, he's got Wyatt Earp's trunk in his basement. He's telling me he's got guns in there. He's telling me the whole story, and it's like, I'm totally fascinated.
And here's some gloves that probably were used during Wyatt Earp's time.
They might have been. I haven't seen a pair like that. I'm glad I don't have to use them.
We can get a shot of this glove here. Just in the remaining moments, we have this glove here is a cool glove. We're talking. Ernie Shavers, Ron Lyle, Ken Norton.
Those are all Ollie opponents.
Yeah,
those are all gentlemen.
Jerry Cooney, is Jerry on there?
He's not on there, but Ernie Shavers is. Yeah. Leon Spinks. Oh, Michael Spinks didn't fight Ollie. But Patterson, right. Kenny Norton, Ernie Terrell, Ron Lyle, and of course Joe Frazier. And a glove like that is possible for anybody who has a chance to visit. Again, these people were accessible, and that's proof. And just so exciting. I mean,
you're a music buff. Here's a trivia for you. Ernie Terrell's sister was in a famous band as a replacement singer. Do you recall who she was?
A Supreme?
Yes.
Was he a
Jean
Supreme?
Terrell, was one of the ones that took over when Diana Ross.
Supremes,
because Ernie did some some. He was in a band himself. So when he wasn't boxing, he was out playing nightclubs.
I know Jimmy Ellis. Jimmy Ellis used to come
Ellis
up.
Was
Jimmy Ellis
one, yeah.
can sing.
There was a fight back in the day. Jimmy Ellis had some wars. Again, another gentleman who I think later suffered some head memory issues. The one I remember was one of the last ones before Foreman. This is Foreman 1, before he came back and became champion. But 77, a war that I saw on TV against Ron Lyle. It was a 5-round fight. Foreman got knocked down, got up. Lyle got knocked down, got up. I mean, it was like a war for 5 rounds, and I believe Foreman lost the fight on a technical knockout.
And I love it. And these guys can take you through each punch. I mean, they literally will go through these punches.
Yeah.
Oh, I hit him here, and he backslashed there, and just incredible stories. I mean,
absolutely. The Madison Square Garden ring, now enshrined at the International Museum Boxing Hall of Fame.
You know, when Ed talked to me about that, he says, "You're not going to believe this." He said, "I got a call. They're going to retire the ring, and they're finally going to invest in a new ring." So anybody who worked at the Garden was just thrilled because they wouldn't have to set up this old ring. And this was not an easy ring to set up. They had special people that set it up, and they want to retire it, and we've got a shot at it. But we've got to put it in a pavilion, and sure enough, they got a hold of it, and it's in the pavilion, and you can see it for yourself when you visit.
Before I forget, tell me the Lennox Lewis story you wanted to share.
Yes, real quick. Lennox Lewis, before he got inducted, he didn't stay. A lot of the fighters stay in Canastota. He ended up staying in Syracuse. I was in Syracuse at the same hotel, just a few rooms down, and he was nervous. And I said, "Champ, I need some pictures of you because I'm writing this book," and I was writing Titletown at the time. He says, "Well, I'll give you some pictures." He said, "Sit me down and tell me what this is all about." So I sat down with Lennox for about 25 minutes and took him through, here's what you have to do. And he was just such a real gentleman. I mean, he couldn't have been better. And I put his picture. He got all dressed up. He came out. He said, "Mark, here's your shot." And so I took a couple shots of him getting in the elevator and it was just so nice.
Yeah,
but
he was more recent vintage heavyweight champ.
Yeah.
Just from what I read, all accounts, a very much a gentleman.
Very much,
Yeah,
very much good for the sport.
Yeah,
you know,
and they need more at all the boxing levels. Believe me, a gentleman that is might be mentioned in the book, but again, had the pleasure of speaking with at length. Again, this is some 30 years ago. I think he's still alive. A hometown boy out of Stamford, Connecticut, a Chico Vijar.
I think he is still alive.
Yeah. He was working
Chico. Yeah, he was a great fighter.
Yeah.
Great fighter, and he beat two great fighters that I like. A gentleman by the name of Johnny Caesarea and Vic Cordell. I think he beat them both, and both those fighters, great fighters. Both those fighters, I think, beat Carmen. Carmen
I got to talk to him because he was like late 50s, early to mid 60s.
Great
vintage.
fighter.
Then he was, last I had touched base with him, he was working, I think, in the city municipal of Stamford. He had a job and was there many years, and just a very nice, very humble man. So I lost touch with him, but I hope that if he is still alive, that he's doing well. But that was, some of the people.
I do mention him in there, and again, Connecticut had more than its share of great fighters. And it's so neat to be here now and to be able to interact with some of the people that are so interested in Connecticut boxing.
Hector Camacho, Macho Camacho, again more recent vintage, but again certainly a character in his own right.
And it brings up a good point. And one of the flavors you'll get from the book is so many pictures of so many international fighters, Far Eastern fighters, Cuban fighters, South American fighters, Puerto Rican fighters. It's really an international event, and that's what I love it so much. People, from Scotland, there's an entourage that comes from Scotland every year. Huge entourage from Scotland. It comes to Canastota every year, and it's become such a world event. I'm just so proud of everybody that has been there since the beginning.
I'm trying to think, who is the one the boxer in the last 20 years? I want to say he might be in jail now, but there was someone heavyweight class that was from Britain or one of the Britain colonies. I'm blanking right now. Matter of fact,
well, Lennox was from Great Britain.
Yeah, but I'm blanking.
Okay.
I think
some, like you said, nowadays with all the alphabet soup, as Bert Sugar
I think he
used
might
to
have
call it.
fought Foreman, as I call it, Foreman 2, after George came back. And recent vintage too, Bernard Hopkins at age 49, I think,
Bernard
just about
Hopkins,
to
great
call
fighter.
it quits. So again, amazing, just the longevity of some of these people. You just hope that up here that everything is good.
It is incredible.
Town U.S.A, boxing in upstate New York. Okay, from bare knuckle brawls to boxing battles, the very best have fought here.
This is one of those books for people too. I just want to remind them you'll probably have to get it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, because I'm not so sure because of the way History Press stocks. I don't know if they're stocking this here in Connecticut.
From my conversations, yes, indeed. So you can check out your website at historypress.net, and I think, it's a very enjoyable read. It's a good book, and as you said before, instead of pouring through these huge tomes, we can cut to the chase here with Town U.S.A. Mark Allen Baker, always a pleasure. Thanks for helping us out.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this conversation.
Absolutely.
It's just delightful to be here.
And we look forward to having you again soon, and we hope you enjoy the program for today. Have yourself a great rest of the week, and we will see you next time here on Studio 411. Have a good day.